What did Germany know about COVID's origins, and when did they know it? According to the German spy agency BND, the nation has been sitting on its own conclusion that COVID-19 did in fact originate from a lab in Wuhan, and that they had known that since 2020. Two German news publications jointly reported that BND was privy to information that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had conducted gain-of-function research modifying viruses to be more transmissible to humans. The report also reveals BND knew about the lab's safety violations.
According to those papers, BND finally shared its assessment with the CIA last fall. In January, the CIA in turn conceded that it is more likely that COVID came from a lab than a nature spillover. The agency, however, still says it has low confidence in any definitive explanation. Now, the New York Times published an op-ed over the weekend titled, "We were badly misled about the event that changed our lives." And that not only acknowledged that there is, quote, no strong evidence ruling out a lab leak, but that there were attempts made to squelch legitimate debate on that point.
Civil liberties and free speech attorney Jenin Younes wrote on X, quote, "A miracle has happened." The New York Times ran an op-ed acknowledging not only that the COVID virus likely originated in a lab, but that government officials and scientists conspired to keep substantiating evidence secret. The lab leak theory was censored on social media because of pressure from the administration. We shouldn't have done it. Chris Martinson posted, quote, "I despise writing in the passive voice to try and blunt the message, so I rewrote the New York Times headline. Yes, COVID came from a lab. Yes, Fauci and many prominent Western virologists conspired to hide that from the public. No, nobody has been arrested." Joining us now to weigh in the latest revelations is Alina Chan, a Boston-based scientist and co-author of Viral, The Search for the Origins of COVID-19. Welcome back to Rising, Alina.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we always love talking with you, and I saw you just commenting on social media that, usually in cases of massive horror and death and destruction that maybe the government had some knowledge of or should have worked harder to prevent, or we should just kind of try to understand what's going on. There's usually an independent investigation. Has that happened in this case, and is the reason there has not been an independent investigation because the U.S. government or its own health advisors will become like they look complicit in what happened?
So I think this was laid out very clearly in the New York Times opinion piece, that it wasn't just that the US couldn't investigate. It was actually that leading scientists and politicians in the West, in the US and Europe, were shutting down the lab leak hypothesis as a conspiracy theory. So it wasn't that there was no means to investigate, it was that the scientists were telling us not to investigate. They were telling us it was case closed, that no lab-based scenario was plausible.
And you have yourself, I believe, written for the New York Times, making the case, responding to people saying, well, we'll never know, I guess we need to move on with our lives, saying that actually a substantial investigation looking at aspects of COVID's origins could provide new insights into how it came to be, could shore up one of the major theories that it's not true that we have to just kind of shake our heads and say, oh, well, we'll never know.
Yeah, so we're saying in the case of even plane crashes, you do an independent investigation. There are nuclear and chemical accidents, you do an independent investigation. But in this case, the US and German intelligence agencies have assessed a very likely lab leak that has caused this pandemic and killed millions of people. And there's no independent investigation, no accountability, still no independent oversight over such risky research. Last month, a top research journal published more of the same type of risky pathogen research done again at low biosafety levels. So there has been no responsibility taken by the scientists or the research funders of such experiments.
Yes, that's so key to point out that this same research continues, even though the consensus has, we still don't know for sure, but that, there are more FBI, CIA, Energy Department, organizations throughout the world. We now know that Germany had this conclusion for years, and yet the research continues under the same kinds of lax safety standards. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's not even, I frequently say, well, if this research absolutely must be done, could it be done in Antarctica or on the moon or something? Why does it have to be done by scientists in a Chinese lab that have misled the world?
Yeah, there certainly have to be higher standards, and there are many ways to make this work safer without banning it outright, because there's a strong biodefense angle to it, and it's really hard to stop virologists from doing it because they all think they're saving lives or contributing to biodefense. And so what has to be done is the work should be centralized in an isolated location, like you said, maybe not such harsh locations, but somewhere very nice, somewhere very nice for the scientists to go spend half the year, quarantine well before coming back to the rest of civilization.
Nice tropical island.
Yeah, nice tropical island, the best food, chefs, everything, all provided, everything provided for them there. They go there every year for their annual, risky experiments, and then they come back to civilization, right? So I think that should be done. That's a cost worth paying to protect billions of lives. Because imagine if COVID-19 had been much more severe, like the 2003 SARS outbreak, which killed 1 in 10 people. Imagine if COVID-19 killed 1 in 10 people. Like, how much of civilization would be left standing today?
Alina, I just wanted to circle back to something you said at the start about the suppression of genuine debate on this issue, because of course it's not only about this German report, although that is very striking. I noticed on social media you were noting that a journalist for the New York Times, at the time he subsequently left, Donald McNeil, was actually seeking information really quite early on about whether it was at least viable or plausible that a lab leak was responsible for COVID-19. And scientists who had written a key paper basically tried to shut him down, even though it appears from some of the emails that they kind of knew he wasn't so off track as they would suggest publicly. Is that a fair way of characterizing that?
Yes, so that New York Times journalist said that he had been a victim of deception. So he had been deceived by these scientists. And if you look at the Slack messages that these scientists exchanged that were obtained through subpoena, they said of this journalist that they said he's very credible, but like every reporter can be misled. They said he's got it right. Let's not tell him. So these guys knew that the journalist was right, that you can't tell whether this virus had come from a lab, and they deliberately misled him. So, I mean, this is all laid bare in their personal exchanges. It's been obtained through subpoena. It's available freely to the public. So and that journalist at the New York Times said that it was because of this deception that the entire New York Times coverage on this topic was corrupted for the whole year, that they just dismissed the lab leak out of hand because these leading virologists had misled them.
And once Don McNeil left the paper, the lead coronavirus reporter for the New York Times afterward was, I believe, Apurva Mandavili, someone who I criticized quite frequently, and I said specifically about the lab leak theory, posted on Twitter and subsequently deleted it. So maybe she changed her mind about the wisdom of posting that, but saying that its origin was a racist conspiracy theory. And I saw an analysis the other day from Vinay Prasad saying that she was an outlier, actually doing a statistical analysis and how much of an outlier her coverage was in terms of needing corrections to the factual assertions she made.
Yeah, but we've seen from this pandemic that the experts are often wrong, and not necessarily because they're lying to us all the time, but because they're figuring things out in real time with us. And so sometimes during the pandemic, they really wanted to appear very confident so that people would trust the science and follow the science. And this has backfired repeatedly with masks, with vaccines, with the origins, like all sorts of parts, even airborne transmission. It backfired on the experts who insisted, for example, that if you get a vaccine, you'll never get COVID-19 again. And so people have completely lost trust in these scientists as well as the reporters who carried water for them. And it wasn't just one reporter at the New York Times, there were several reporters, all just nonstop carrying water for these scientists, insisting even in the absence of evidence that their claims are correct. And I'd like to note that the news reporting section of the New York Times is separate from the opinion section. And so on Twitter, for example, you're seeing a lot of people piling on the opinion section writer today and yesterday about this piece. I think you should direct your energy and your criticisms to the correct reporters, the ones who carried water for these scientists who claimed that it was a raccoon dog that gave us COVID-19.
Yes. Alina, before we let you go, I just wanted to be clear, because it's so easy sometimes to overgeneralize these arguments or these observations, and frankly, you have a lot more knowledge of the science than I do. What is your level of confidence or certainty that this did emerge from a lab versus the competing theory?
I think I am aligned with the German intelligence as well as the FBI in the US. So the FBI is the only intelligence agency in the US that reached an assessment with moderate confidence. And they assessed that with moderate confidence that this came from a lab. And so what it means with moderate confidence is that it's actually quite high confidence. It just means that they don't have direct proof. So if they had direct proof, they would be high confidence already. And that is what we're all missing. We don't have the direct proof. But if you look at all of the circumstantial evidence right now, the most obvious answer, I would say, is the lab leak hypothesis, that these scientists followed through with the plan that they laid out in 2018, put a furin cleavage site into a SARS-like virus, and boom, in 2019, there was a SARS-like virus with a furin cleavage site causing an outbreak in their city. And to date, all of the hundreds of known SARS-like viruses, none of them have such a furin cleavage site. So it really is begging the obvious here. And I think the scientific community has to just move forward with this. Just assume that the pandemic was started by a lab leak and take measures to prevent it from happening again.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, what is Sarah Palin up to? We will discuss her efforts to hold the New York Times accountable and whether that frustrates or violates attempts to protect free speech. We'll discuss. Stay tuned.